I never imagined I'd fall victim to an overzealous HOA leader, but life has a way of catching you off guard. My name is Jordan, and this is the outrageous tale of how my neighbor Karen, who took it upon herself to act as the head of our HOA, chose my front door as a parking space for her bicycle, setting off a chain of events that would ultimately lead to her undoing. It all started on a Tuesday morning. I was already running late for an important work meeting, juggling my laptop bag, keys, and coffee, ready to head out, only to find that my door wouldn't open more than a few inches. Confused, I tried pushing harder, assuming it was just stuck, but it stayed firmly shut. I squeezed my head through the narrow gap to see what was blocking it. To my disbelief, an old pink bicycle was chained not just to the railing, but directly to my doorknob with a thick chain, effectively sealing me inside. As I stood there stunned, I spotted a woman across the sidewalk, arms crossed, a smug expression on her face, watching me struggle. "Excuse me," I said as calmly as I could, despite my growing frustration. "Is this your bike?" "I can't get out of my house," I asked, still trying to keep my cool. The woman strolled over with the air of someone used to getting her way. She looked to be in her late 40s, with a sharp blonde bob that practically shouted manager confrontation, and designer sunglasses resting on her head despite the overcast sky. "Yes, it's mine," she replied, sounding more annoyed at me for asking than concerned about blocking my door. I didn't have anywhere else to put it. I pointed to the completely empty bike rack just 20 feet away in our townhouse complex shared space. "There's literally a bike rack right there." She dismissed me with a wave. "Those are always full." They weren't. I could see, with my own eyes, that every slot was open. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I really need to get to work. Could you please unlock your bike so I can get out?" She tilted her head and smiled in that smug, condescending way that made my blood boil. "This is shared property. I'm allowed to use it." "This is my front door," I replied, now feeling like I was explaining basic logic to a child. "It's not a place to lock up a bike." "Well, I don't see any signs saying I can't," she shot back. I'd had enough. "If you don't move it, I'm calling the police." That's when she gave me that look, that smug little smirk that said she thought she was untouchable. "Go ahead," she said, flicking her wrist like she was dismissing a servant. I'm the HOA." She stressed those letters like they were some kind of royal title, then turned and walked off, leaving me locked in my own home. I had no choice but to crawl out through the back window just to get to my meeting. I had no idea at the time, but this was just the beginning of what would become a full-blown nightmare with Karen, the HOA tyrant next door. I'd been renting my townhouse for about 6 months, keeping a low profile and staying on the good side of the homeowners association. My lawn was always neat, my trash bins were out of sight, and I mostly kept to myself. I'd heard whispers about the new HOA president, a woman known for leaving snide notes for trivial things, like non-approved doormats or Christmas lights that overstayed their welcome by a day. Still, I never imagined I'd end up in her crosshairs. That evening, after the indignity of climbing back into my home through the window, something no 35-year-old professional should have to do, I wrote what I considered a calm, respectful note. "Please remove your bicycle from my door. This is a safety hazard and prevents me from using my entrance. Thank you." I left it tucked into the basket on her bike and went to bed, thinking any rational person would see the issue and fix it. Was wrong. The next morning, not only was the bike still chained to my doorknob, but my note had been balled up and tossed onto my welcome mat like garbage. Frustrated, I once again exited through the back and walked over to Karen's unit, which was just 3 doors down. I knocked, trying to stay polite. When she answered, her expression soured as soon as she recognized me. "Yes?" she asked sharply. "Hi, I'm Jordan from a few doors down. I left a note asking if you could move your bike from my front door. It's still blocking my way in and out, and I really need to use my front entrance." She leaned casually in the doorway, her tone full of condescension. "That area is technically shared property. Your lease only gives you access to the inside of your unit. The outside, including your stoop, belongs to the HOA. "But I can't get in or out of my home," I said, trying once more to reason with her, though it was becoming clear she wasn't operating with much of it. "You've got a back door, don't you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I do. But then use that." She began closing the door, but I raised my hand, not touching it, just signaling that I wasn't done. "Look, I'm not trying to escalate this, but blocking someone's only usable exit is a fire hazard." "That's actually illegal," I said, trying to keep the conversation grounded in facts. She straightened to her full height, still about 5 inches shorter than me, and narrowed her eyes. "Are you threatening me?" she snapped, her voice climbing an octave. No, I answered evenly. I'm just stating the law. I'd really appreciate it if you moved your bike to the designated rack. She jabbed a finger in my direction. If you touch my property, I'll fine you for interfering with an HOA-approved installation. That's a $500 violation. And just like that, she slammed the door in my face. I stood there stunned. Was this seriously happening? Could she actually fine me for removing a bike that was illegally chained to my front door? I didn't know for sure, but I wasn't willing to test it, at least not yet. I decided to give it one more day before taking further action. But that decision meant 2 more days of climbing in and out of my home through the back window, scrambling over the kitchen counter like some kind of home-invading raccoon in my own house. My coworkers had begun noticing my disheveled appearance, and there was no easy way to explain that I was crawling through windows because a neighborhood tyrant had chained her rusty pink bike to my door. The truth just sounded too ridiculous. By day 3, I was done. I came home, saw the bike still, chained to my doorknob, and immediately called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher reassured me that an officer would be sent to help sort things out. As I waited, I relaxed on my back patio, quietly savoring the thought of Karen's reaction when the police showed up at her door. About 20 minutes later, I heard voices and some raised tones coming from out front. I walked around to find 2 police officers standing near my door, inspecting the ridiculous scene. Karen's bike still chained firmly to my doorknob, while Karen herself was gesticulating animatedly, trying to dominate the conversation. "This is HOA business," she was insisting, her voice raised. "You don't have jurisdiction here. This is private property. We're governed by our own bylaws." The officers, a calm, composed man and woman who clearly weren't new to neighborhood drama, listened with unreadable expressions while Karen ranted. They didn't rise to her tone. "Ma'am," the female officer said evenly, "regardless of any HOA rules, city code prohibits blocking someone's entrance. That's a safety hazard." Karen's face turned crimson. "Do you even know who I am?" she snapped. "I'm the president of this homeowners association. I determine what's allowed here." The male officer turned to me and asked, "Sir, is this your residence?" Before I could answer, Karen cut in sharply. "He's just a renter. He doesn't have the same rights as an owner. He's been interfering with HOA property, and I'm going to fine him for it," Karen snapped. Then, things took a bizarre turn. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed off toward her townhouse. The officers and I exchanged puzzled glances. Moments later, she reappeared, this time wielding a pair of bolt cutters. We watched, stunned, as she stomped past us and made a beeline for my mailbox. "If he wants to complain about where I keep my property," she huffed, positioning the cutters around the post of my mailbox, "then let's see how he feels when I remove his illegal mailbox." This style was never approved by the architectural committee. She was mid-swing when the female officer stepped in. "Ma'am, put that tool down immediately," she ordered. "Tampering with a mailbox is a federal offense." Karen froze, bolt cutters still in hand. "This is HOA property," she muttered, though her voice had noticeably lost its edge. "Actually," the male officer said, stepping closer, "I'm going to need to see some documentation verifying that you're the HOA president." Karen's bravado crumbled in an instant. Her expression shifted from smug authority to flustered uncertainty. I have it inside," she stammered. "I am the president. Everyone knows that." At that moment, Mr. Chan, an elderly neighbor from across the courtyard, walked over to the scene. "Officers," he began politely, "I've lived here for 15 years and served on the previous HOA board. There hasn't been a legitimate meeting or election in over 6 months. The last board dissolved when the president moved away. No one ever voted Karen into any position." Karen went pale. "That's not true," she snapped. "I've been collecting dues and enforcing the rules for months." Mr. Chan raised an eyebrow. "You've been collecting dues? Without a functioning board or a treasury account? Where's that money gone?" The 2 officers exchanged a look. That signaled this was no longer just about a bicycle. The female officer turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one last time to remove your bicycle from this gentleman's doorway, or we'll do it ourselves." Karen gripped the bolt cutters tighter. "No, this is my property. I have every right." The male officer stepped in. "Actually, you're in violation of City Ordinance 212.5, which prohibits obstructing residential entryways. And if what Mr. Chan is saying is true, you may also be facing charges for impersonating an HOA official and fraudulently collecting funds." What happened next was both outrageous and oddly predictable. Karen raised the bolt cutters over her head and yelled, "None of you understand how hard I work to keep this place functioning. Without me, everything would fall apart. The officers sprang into action. The female officer grabbed the bolt cutters while her partner gently but firmly restrained Karen, guiding her arms behind her back. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for obstruction and disorderly conduct," he said, calmly beginning to read her Miranda rights. Karen immediately launched into a tirade, raging about her rights, threatening lawsuits, demanding badge numbers, and claiming persecution. The female officer radioed for tools to remove the chained bike, and within minutes, my doorway was finally free. As the police car drove off with Karen still ranting inside, curious neighbors began stepping outside. Mr. Chan explained the situation, and to my surprise, several residents chimed in with their own Karen horror stories. She'd apparently spent months terrorizing the community, inventing rules, handing out bogus fines, and even locking her bike to random porches, claiming it was her right under imaginary communal access policies. Within a week, the residents held an official HOA meeting. A new board was elected with Mr. Chan as president, and their first unanimous decision was to permanently bar Karen from ever serving on the HOA in any capacity. But Karen's problems didn't end there. The investigation revealed that her collection of dues and fines qualified as fraud. Coupled with her public meltdown, arrest, and false representation of authority, she now faced real criminal charges. When the judge handed down her sentence, 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution payments to everyone she had swindled, Karen was visibly stunned. "I was just trying to maintain property values," she cried, as her lawyer tried to calm her. The judge, clearly unimpressed, added a contempt of court charge on the spot, slapping her with an extra $1,000 fine. Karen stood there, mouth agape, in absolute disbelief.